Did Kate Mila Falcha. Welcome to Irish Granny Tarot. It's time for our Saturday book. And I wasn't going to do this book right now. I had it prepared, but I had a different book already prepared for today. And I changed my mind because, first of all, I got so many requests for this book. It's crazy. Second of all, it just seemed appropriate. In reference to a lot of things we've talked about lately, it just all seems to tie in, as you know, as it so frequently does. And I just felt like I wanted to do it. So as you know, Dolores Cannon is new to me. And we're going to do her book today, Between Life and Death. When I started doing her books, I think the first one I did a few months back was Jesus and the Essenes, because I was curious about the Essenes, and it was fascinating. And then, of course, we did the Nostradamus trilogy, and that was really interesting. When I watch her videos, I don't think she's not as good a speaker as she is a writer, in my opinion. And let's just say that her writing resonates for me on a completely different level than her actual physical presentations do. And I think that might be because it's not necessarily intentional on her part. Well, she's passed now, but it wasn't necessarily intentional on her part. I think it broadens her audience. It reaches more people that way. I think for the people who are more inclined to read the books, they strike a chord. And for the people who would be more likely to stumble on her work on video, it strikes a slightly different chord, but it's all connected. I hope that makes sense. So, her book Between Life and Death was originally printed in 1993, and this is a reprint from 2021. And it's about death, but it's not spooky, scary, depressing, or anything like that. It's fascinating, and I don't know, I really connected with it. So I hope you will enjoy it too. So let's just get started. Chapter 1, The Death Experience. So she introduces herself because she's assuming that people reading this book are reading her work for the first time. So if there's a little bit of extra explanation that you already know about her, don't worry about it. It's for the newcomers. She's a regressionist. She started hypnotizing people for smoking and weight loss and realized they were talking about past life experiences and then really delved into it. She takes people to their past lives, but also to the time period between lives. And as you know, yesterday, we were talking about the bardo, which is a Tibetan explanation or term. Ignore Scarlet. That's my parrot. Nobody's screaming in the background. She's singing with Raffi, the children's songwriter and performer. She loves a little Raffi. Hi, Canada. So, sorry about that. Just ignore her. Dolores Cannon talked about this in-between stage, you know, after you die and until you reincarnate, if you do, because it's a choice, there's this period of time. And it's described by most philosophical and religious beliefs. Yesterday we were talking about George Saunders, who wrote Lincoln in the Bardo, and the Bardo being the Tibetan notion of the between times, between death and life. And Saunders referred to it as sort of a purgatory, which is a very Catholic reference to make. Anyway, she says that not a lot of hypnotists are willing to delve into this. They back off when people start undergoing hypnosis and relating these experiences because there's a lot of fear around it. And we've talked about fear. Fear is a real inhibitor. But her experience, and she did it for years and years and years, as I said, she has died now. Now she knows. But her experience was that nothing harmful ever happened to people. If the process of hypnosis and regression was too much for them, then they just, agreed, she and they agreed to stop doing it. Now, in this book, in case I forget to mention it, there's many different subjects relating often their experience with the same thing, and their experiences were slightly different, but nobody completely contradicted anybody else. So it sometimes may sound just a little repetitious because it'll be the narrative of one person and then immediately contrasted with the narrative of another person going over the same ground. But it is interesting to see the different perspectives. So she said she never had anybody have physical harm from any of this. And she said that she actually found this state of death between the process of dying and the process of reincarnating being the most exciting part of the regressive sessions that she did. Very, very interesting. And she said that the information that they were able to garner from that was really the most beneficial to a lot of her subjects, who actually came to her often as people seeking treatment for bad habits or whatever, and would stumble on this remarkable ability to go all the way back. She says somnambulists tend to be better regressive subjects. There's something about their ability to delve into that area. And basically what these people report back 100% is that there really is no need for us to have this fear of death that we carry around with us. She says that when people report what they've experienced, they discover that they're familiar with what they're going through. They had just forgotten about it while they were incarnate because they've experienced it before many times, and many people refer to it as their home, and the period of time that they're here on earth is like being away. The discovery that she came to, or the conclusion that she came to, is that birth and death are evolutionary cycles and all part of a natural evolution, development, and growth of the soul, that after life on a physical plane, there's life on other planes that you don't, you die and everything goes black and you're done with. That there's actually a whole other myriad of experiences going on. So she begins her book at a place that most people begin the journey of understanding of death. When she started doing this, she had been inculcated in culture with the notion of heaven, hell, purgatory. Many people see death as a black void, and for everybody it's an unknown, and for many that this is fear-inducing. And people are really worried that their personality just disappears. Their self is gone when they take their last breath. So at first Cannon did regressions because she liked the history, the regression into past lives, because she really liked the history. She liked to hear what life was like and what things were experienced by people in the past. And in the process, she accidentally came on this period of not incarnated, where people are in some other plane, and the state between lives. And she says, after you leave the physical reality, before you reincarnate, if you reincarnate, because it's a choice, there's this whole other thing that happens. And she was shocked the first time a subject was regressed to their previous death and were able to tell her about that experience, looking down on their own corpse. But the person was still the person, intact in personality. And Cannon found that you remain basically like the same person that you are right now after your body dies. It's just that you're not in this vehicle. And they often refer to it as a vehicle. Religious belief seems to have no influence on the experience of the subjects that she regressed. It didn't matter if they were atheist, agnostic, fundamentalist, mainstream, white bread, Christian, Islamic, Jewish, Buddhist, whatever. They all had the same experience. They all report the same thing, and also they report the same thing no matter what their manner of death was, whether it was old age, an accident, suicide. And just to warn everybody that the subject does come up, and so I'll try to remember to mention it. So if you want to fast forward if it's too much for you. Murder, just any kind of death, didn't seem to matter to affect the experience after you're dead. What happens is always the same. And they all report back that we've all gone through this many, many times, and subconsciously we know that. She says it's a fascinating other world, and with the process of death, you come to the realization that you have much more wisdom than you were aware of on earth. And when the physical body is shed, there's a whole new dimension of knowledge. The human body hampers and limits us. Spirit perceives far more without the burden of the body. And it can be expressed by the subject depending on their personal spiritual growth. So some people have more interest in this and have pursued it more, therefore they have more earthly understanding of different kinds of belief systems, different experiences with religion and philosophy and metaphysics. And for them, the words came easier after they were out of their hypnotic state. They were able to talk about a lot of this, and in the hypnotic state, because they recognized what it was they were experiencing. But it's not true for everybody. For some people who are, rigidly religious of a certain kind, or rigidly atheistic, or whatever, this was kind of a shock. She said, at death, people report first they feel cold, and then their spirit is capable of looking at the body, and they feel released, free, light, and in the light, liberated, exhilarated, glad to be rid of the burden of the body. They report a feeling of peace and calm with no needs, all the clutter that we have gone. Depending on the person, and it depends on their karma, their experience in life, the level of their evolution spiritually, they need more or less rest after they die. And there may be none, and it may be a lengthy period because they need to heal from trauma. No predicting. And it's sort of a floating in-between state where they're kind of don't want to be disturbed, and they just sort of heal. And spirits tell her that they're in the light where all knowledge is, and everything is pure and simple. So there's lots of information that comes through these sessions, and sometimes what I'm going to say is going to seem a little random because she's presenting bits and pieces of different subjects' experiences. So one of them is that pain on earth is a lesson. And interestingly, it ceases if you learn to move your mind to a higher level of consciousness. You can reach deep and you can move above it. And this kind of reminded me in a way of the birthing classes that always tried to get you to take your head out of the experience of a contraction. It's the closest thing I can associate. So pain, she was told, is a teaching tool, and it's sometimes used to humble people. And over all of this, I have to just sort of give kind of an explanation, warning, and we talk about it more throughout the book, but just so that you're prepared, I guess, for the things she's going to say. All of this is a choice, according to the experiences of these people. Everything that happens to you is a choice. You've already worked it out. You come into life with a burden of karma, good and bad, with other spirits that you have planned, pre-life, planned to interact with. The lessons that you've chosen in this lifetime, excuse me, you choose for the spiritual development that they provide. And so you just have yourself to thank. And we choose the difficulties and we choose the good things. And there's a lesson in everything. And so the pain you experience, the trauma, the loss, whatever you experience, all teaching tools. And it's sometimes chosen by you, the experiencer, ahead of time, to learn humility. And like somebody who's been haughty in a past life might decide, yeah, I need to learn to not be that way. And this pain that I will experience in this new life is going to be an opportunity for me to be more gracious through suffering. Or you've opted to volunteer to be the person who suffers for the lessons it teaches the people around you. So it's a very intricate network of associations of spirits working together. See, you could be taught to rise above pain, to understand pain and why we have it, and that can help to lessen it. People get too self-centered, and they think that they can't handle what's going on in their lives, and that's an ego thing, and that we have to learn to rise to a more spiritual level. Everything that happens in your life, and it sounds really trite, and I don't mean it in a Hallmark card sense, but what they say is it's all been decided ahead of time for the lessons that it provides. So in that sense, everything happens for a reason, and rather than make it worse by fighting against it, it's spiritually more elevated to regard everything that happens to you as a lesson and ask yourself, what's the lesson? And why didn't I do my homework? After reading this book, I'm just horrified by some of the things that I say, because it's all pointed to as signs that you're not an evolved soul. We'll talk about it all later. So it's unnecessary to really experience pain if we don't give it power. Now, like I said, unevolved. If you can reach into your higher mind, it'll have no hold on you. And you can separate yourself from it and not give it power. This is a quote from the book. People often want pain without realizing it. And this is interesting, that spiritually, it's kind of like a Munchausen's thing. You're looking for sympathy. And another interesting psychological factor is you're looking for self-punishment. And it may be subconscious factors you're not even aware of. People have to figure all this out for themselves. That's why you're here, is to figure this all out and try to see why it happens. So when you die, it's like lifting of a burden, a lifting of a weight. We all carry burdens, and death feels like tossing the burdens out the window. So people fear the unknown, and the lesson that Canon got from talking to all these different people was that we need to learn to trust that it's going to be okay. So when you die, you just rise into the light. And the worst thing that can happen isn't as bad as our fear of what might happen. Fear is a monster in man's minds, and it only affects those on earth. The spirit is unaffected by fear. Fear is a construct of life on earth. And then there's a lot of stuff here that's, we debate about this all the time. I think it's very interesting. Don't know where I completely stand on it, but it's very interesting. Thought is an energy form, and it can create fear of something, and it can make things happen. Now, people will say, don't focus on these terrible political things, because then it manifests it. And that sounds like saying the same thing, but when she digs into it, it's not quite what they're getting at. So we'll get back to this. But the fear of dying is a pointless fear, because dying is easy. Your confusion ends, your fear ends, your burdens end. What's worse, the hard part of all of this, is when you're reborn at first as a baby, your spirit is confused. It's like, whoa, wait a minute. And it takes a while and we're going to talk about that. But the very final chapter talks about that. It's fascinating. So really, dying is the easy part. So you come back to complete whatever cycle that you're on, and you have to learn things, but you have to learn a lot of things, and you have to learn them properly, and it may take many, many, many life cycles to overcome all the things of the world, to enter into perfection and everlasting life. So we have to endure and stay with a life until we've learned all we can possibly learn from that life. We have to work things out with people, because what you do here on earth comes back around again, and not in a punitive way, not in a judgmental way. As you'll find out, it's more like, oh, okay, well, I didn't learn that, so here we go again. Most people, when they die, do have kind of a life review, and it's often with the help of masters or guides, and sometimes it's linear. You'll see events, it's really speeded up, but you'll see events one after another, like in a lifetime. And sometimes it's more of a broad survey of scenes, like looking at a quilt and seeing, oh, that's connected to that's connected to that. Just depends on the person. She says sometimes it's like observing a garden. You remember the work that it took to get the beautiful garden, and you're recognizing all the individual plantings that you did, but also the entire vision of the garden. And there's no judgment, just note-taking on what to do differently next time. And one man told her that dying is pleasant. It's like emerging from water. When you jump into deep water and it's dark and you emerge and you come out into the light, it's like that. It's not painful unless you've already made the decision to experience pain as a lesson in it, and then you realize it when it's all over. But your spirit doesn't feel pain. The spirit can leave the body before your actual death to avoid pain. So like a sudden traumatic accident, or, I don't know, some medical event that's really horrendous and you get unconscious. Your spirit actually bails out, because then it doesn't feel the pain. It's comforting to know that loved ones probably didn't experience the kind of trauma that we think that they did when they were conscious and they knew it was going on. But people will have, like, be in an accident and have a near-death experience, and they'll come back and they'll say, the car was coming at me and we crashed, and the next thing I knew, I was standing outside my body. That kind of situation. So after a physical death, your memories are intact, because this is where karma comes into play. You feel the same, your life continues, it's just not connected to a physical body. And your perception is broadened. It's like your senses are fine-tuned. Your soul is your spirit, so the two terms are interchangeable. Your identity, your reality, your true self is your spirit. You actually have literally have a silver cord, a lifeline, which is an energetic connection that attaches your spirit to your body. And it's severed at death, and it doesn't accidentally get severed. So people worry that if you astral project in your sleep, you can see the cord. What if it accidentally gets cut? It's a decision. It has to be a decision. So there's, this is so funny. I must remember what I've read, but I don't realize I ever read it. Because the next line I wrote was, there's no fear in astral travel. The cord cannot be accidentally cut without having the time be right. So most of us don't realize that we all travel out of our body while we're asleep. That's what you're up to. And the spirit doesn't sleep. And she said, just imagine, you know, if you're sleeping 8 hours, your spirit's sitting around like this bored. They continue to grow and learn things, and we continue to grow and learn things. So while the body sleeps, the spirit can go anywhere on the earth, into other dimensions, other planets, interact with other spirits. You remain connected by your silver cord, and there's no danger. You're not going to get lost. You're not going to have it accidentally broken, so don't be afraid. Often old people decide they don't want to come back, and they make the decision, okay, I'm done, and cut that cord on purpose. And, you know, that's when people die of old age, and, you know, they don't really know why they died. They just, you know, died of old age. If they did an autopsy, they would find no cause, is what they were told here in this book, that, you know, it's a decision. And we'll talk more about babies dying towards the end. And I'll warn you. She talks about spontaneous combustion, just sort of in passing. I thought this was so interesting because I didn't think this was a thing, you know. Spontaneous combustion is a genetic imbalance in chemicals in the body that actually happens. I don't know about that. I'll have to look into that. So when people are in spirit form, they make a plan before they reincarnate, and they know what they hope to accomplish and who they want to accomplish it with, because spirits kind of travel in packs. And also they have an exit plan, and you might have a couple of different points in your life where if your spirit on a subconscious level decides you're out of here, but you have a plan. And there's no such thing as accidents. It's all been planned for the lessons and for the escape hatch. When the soul's done with the lessons that we're learning, we're oblivious while in our body, because she says, you know, we're oblivious about all of this going on, because it wouldn't be a test if you knew all the answers. You have to be oblivious. So group karma, this is interesting. Souls work together, and they often agree before birth to die together. So when you have mass tragedies like 9/11, like a plane crash, like shootings, that these souls have agreed ahead of time, we're going to experience this together for whatever reason. They find support in group transition. They may have shared multiple lives and multiple deaths, and the time is right. So in a near-death experience, people often feel they've gone down a tunnel to a light, and then they feel they're pulled back before they get all the way into the light. And they just haven't cut the cord. They do get pulled back. So often a group experience of a group death has a purpose for the people left behind. The grieving, like a collective grieving, a large social and national grieving, this is intentional. There's some lesson in this. Like, take for example what's going on in Ukraine. This is a horrible situation and a lesson. And it's not just a lesson for the people whose homes are being bombed, or for the people who are being shot, or whatever. It's a lesson for the perpetrators, family members, the neighbors, and the world, for all of us. So, chapter 2. Sorry. The greeters. So after death, a lot of people, spirits, will feel confused. And the less prepared you are, the less you read this book, less you watch this video, the less prepared you are, the less thought you've put into it, the more confused you're likely to be. And there are spirits who volunteer to be there, to act as like your tour guide. And people will not be sure where they are, because it's very similar to being alive, except it's not alive. It's just more acutely felt. So they need a period of reorientation, and help comes immediately. And these are usually, well, almost always, souls with close karmic connections to your past lives or to the present life that have died ahead of you. And I think I mentioned before, I had a very vivid dream. I occasionally have not dreams. And I had this dream, years ago. I was an adult. I had children. I was in this house, as a matter of fact. My maternal grandmother lived with us until she died. We brought her over from Ireland, and she lived with us until she died. And I wasn't exactly really close to her, but, we lived together. She was a family member. She wasn't a confidant necessarily, but we were good, So one night, I had a dream that my grandmother came to me, and this wasn't a dream. And she said one thing to me. She said, Helen, don't worry. When you die, don't be afraid. I'll be there to help you. I woke up the next morning. I was like, whoa, because I had not given much of this stuff any thought at all. I was raising small children. I was distracted. But boy, I could tell this was not a dream. And it was reassuring. I don't know how much stock I put into it, but after reading this book, I'm thinking, oh, geez, just pay attention to those sorts of dreams, because there's a lot of stuff going on when you're asleep. So these karmic connections from your life or your past lives meet you. They're usually between incarnations themselves, and often have waited for you, and often from your immediate past lifetime. But it may be like a grandparent who died before you were born, and you're like, oh, I recognize you from pictures. So the confusion also comes from the fact that not only do you feel disoriented, and you feel exactly like your own self with your own memories and everything, but now you remember all your past lives too. Whoa. So it's overwhelming. And now you see where you fit into the karmic picture. Just, all of a sudden. So it's a lot. You start remembering your many connections to all these other souls. And it helps you to understand what you've completed, what you've learned, what the lessons were, how well you learned the lessons, and what you'll need to work on later when you return to Earth, if you choose to return to Earth. And there are other options. So if at all possible, at least one soul you're familiar with will come and help you. Always somebody comes and helps, but they try to have somebody you recognize so you're not as freaked out. And it helps explain what's going on, this soul does, to the person who's died, and especially to somebody who's died unexpectedly, like violently, suddenly. One minute they're walking down the street minding their own business, and the next minute they're hit by a bus. So they're like, whoa, what was that? It's all explained to them. So your soul goes to a plane where learning occurs. It's a state of being. It's not a place. It's a state of being. And you interact with other souls, and you learn things you need to learn. And life provides you with opportunities to intensively learn hard lessons quickly. Not always thoroughly, but quickly. You can learn all this stuff sitting around on this spiritual plane, but souls want to evolve. They have a desire to evolve, and so coming back to Earth is more efficient. Spiritual masters are consulted about your next life and which souls would be the best ones to interact with, and this is a choice. This is up to you. You're presented with, okay, there's this, and this. What do you want to do? You can choose to stay, but eventually, because I guess maybe we're smarter, wiser, without attachments to the physical body. Eventually, on a spiritual plane, you get to the point where you're like, hey, well, yeah, I need to move on. So, okay, I'll go back, or I'll go elsewhere. So there's also a resting place for souls who've died traumatically. We talked about that. Like you might need to just sort of rest at first to restore your vibe. So she said something interesting. She said some people who die are coming into death with religious expectations. They want a cloud and a golden gate and harps and, you know, wings and all that stuff. And she says people who request to meet some sort of religious figure that would give them reassurance because they have a deep abiding belief in a particular religion or entity or whatever, that's what they'll see. So you get what you expect. If you expect to see Jesus, you'll see Jesus. If you expect to see Buddha, you'll see Buddha. If you think you're going to go to hell because you feel really, really guilty, then you're going to experience something negative at first. But it doesn't harm you. It's an experience, and it doesn't take very long for people to realize, wait a minute, this is of my own making. This is my own creation. This is not real. And boom, it's gone. So don't worry about that. So what you expect to find, you do find. And if you expected to wake in a carnival, if you expect when I die, when I was really, really little, I used to hope that when I die, and I was a weird kid, I hope heaven is a mountain of chocolate ice cream. So, you know, if I had died then, that's probably what it would have seemed like to me at first, which is really kind of embarrassing. So if it's a gentle death, there's a feeling of relief. By that, like you die of old age. You know, there's just this relief and a sense of freedom. If you believe in hellfire and damnation and expect it, you're going to get it. But it all depends on the preparation that you've put into it prior to dying. And they have very harsh words in this book over and over and over again for philosophies and religious beliefs and cults that brainwash people into a state of fear. It's just horrendously bad thing to do, and it's going to require a lot of undoing on the part of the people who cause it. There is nothing to be afraid of, and this fear of going to hell is such a mistake. It's so untrue, and yeah, they talk about it a lot. We'll encounter that topic again. So most often a familiar soul will come as a guide to help you to lose the confusion. And if it's a very traumatic death, the soul might rest, as you can see now where this is repeating because different people are telling her this. The soul may rest a long time until the soul can process the realization that the body is dead, and their reawakening in that plane will be slow. And if souls don't get this slow realization and they panic, they can feel an urge and demand to go reincarnate immediately, but when they're really not ready. And they feel like when they die, this can't be happening, and then they come into it, and then they're just in a state. So they are able to experience this period of rest and healing that helps as an adaptive measure. So what constitutes a traumatic death may not be what we would think. For example, somebody who dies as a soldier in a cause that they believe in, that might not be a traumatic death for that soul, because there's a lot going on there philosophically and spiritually. As opposed to somebody who dies in childbirth. It could be very traumatic because this is not what you had planned or expected. So there's a lot of variables. There's an established cycle of returning to Earth, and it usually we want to re-enter the cycle eventually because we'd be bored to just sit between lives. And she said, she compares it to opting to stay in the third grade forever. There would be no learning, there'd be no challenge. You would get bored. I mean, how much fun can that be forever? It just wouldn't be, there'd be no point. Death is necessary to progress. It's like climbing a ladder. We move up and beyond with each lesson. And with each lesson that's learned, we evolve to a new lesson and get higher and higher and higher. So once energy exists, it cannot be destroyed, and death does not end life energy. It just doesn't. Your soul is energy. Your personality is energy. Your thoughts are energy. So we are pure beings of energy manifested on a lower physical form. Death is the great denier. It's the most unspoken about thing. It's the most thought about subject. But there's no need for fear, because with death there's a release back into a life which far exceeds life on earth. It's never okay. Now, suicide topic here. If you want to go away for, 30 seconds. It's never okay to cast off your life before it's time. And one of the major reasons is you're interfering with karma. Things might be just horrible in your life and you'd be really depressed and, you kill yourself. Well, the problem with that is you're going to have to come back and deal with the same problems again until you evolve and learn how to cope. Those are lessons you selected. So, and there can be mental illness involved, there can be depression involved, there can be a lot of factors involved. So it's not about judgment. It's just about saying, well, if you're thinking this is going to be an easy out, think again. And nobody is like punished for it. It's just, it complicates your karma. Because not only have you not dealt with what you need to deal with karmically, now you got the karma of doing that. So, okay. Philosophical dogma is how people close their minds to what really is. These are messages that are coming through these subjects. Some creeds, some belief systems, if they hear this book, would deny all of this information, would argue up and down, this is all baloney. For example, the belief in heaven and hell. For example, rejecting the notion of reincarnation, which, by the way, the early Christian church believed in. Just thought I'd tell you that. They voted reincarnation out. So the understanding of reincarnation helps people avoid the depression of thinking that they're screwing up their only chance. This is not your only chance. Every day you get up and you try again and make mistakes in multiple places throughout the day, and it's easy to just go, oh, God. But, it's a process. It's not a one-time opportunity. So you have many chances. You can do your best and not feel awful about the mistakes you make. Just resolve, acknowledge them. I'm going to do better next time. Try to do your best today. And churches don't want us to believe in this. They don't want us to believe in reincarnation because that loosens their grip on fear and they no longer have control. And somebody in the book told Dolores Cannon that even Hindus, who have a reputation for thinking otherwise, it can be about control. The Hindu school of thought uses this control in a different manner because they say that, quote, this man has done something in his previous existence to make him suffer now. Therefore, why should I help him? He has done something to deserve this suffering. In this way, they're using the same tactics as Christianity or any of the others. You have to remember that not all of those people who say that they are on the side of religion, as they define it, being good, they perhaps are being warped by the darker side of things without even knowing it. Men have removed many things from the Bible and added what they wished. They have no cares. They think this is what I wish to say, and therefore this is what it says. People seem to have a fear, she asks, when something like this is brought up, when you try to tell them that the Bible has been changed many times throughout history. And they just go on to say, yeah, people don't want to hear that, but that's the truth. Let's see, where am I here? Many people are afraid of free thinking. Even Jesus was accused of being crazy and wrong. Well, look what happened to him, right? It's important to make all this known to spark others to recognize it as truth, which is why I'm really happy that I read this book. like I said, I still haven't resolved completely in my own mind what I think or how I feel about this. But in my gut, this is important information. So I would recommend reading this book. Something to think about. It's very, very interesting. The truth about this sort of stuff has been suppressed for centuries, is what they tell her. This needs to come out, which is why this little old lady doing anti-smoking hypnosis suddenly writes a book like this, is because she was approached. She was contacted. So, chapter 3 talks about a near-death experience. She said that she had subjects who talked about their near-death experiences with her, and she got lots of information from them, as well as from people who were regressed past lives. So she talked to a girl called Meg, who felt forever changed by the experience of coming close to death. She felt it was a gift. She had surgery in 1978 to remove a lesion on her lung, and she intuitively felt that it wasn't cancer, but she was nervous about having the surgery. She said she had a very loose Christian childhood, so kind of Christianity light, close to being agnostic atheist, but, you know, she was a decent person. And the night before surgery, she had this fear that she wouldn't come out of it. She said that she actually said a prayer and put it out there into the universe that I have doubts, and this is the best I can do, is just to admit that I have doubts and I'm scared. So she spent 3 days in ICU on Demerol and had a sudden near-death experience. She saw herself going down a canyon and with mountains on either side that had flickering lights, which she later came to realize were actually souls. And she had a warm, secure feeling. It was a misty place that she was walking to, but the entry was blocked by rocks. There was just enough room to squeeze through the rocks, but people were blocking her path through them. There were 2 men and a third shadowy figure that looked like Gene Wilder and Willy Wonka. This was some serious Demerol, is all I can say. She suddenly realized that she was dying, and she started to be afraid. And they told her, you are at the border of death. And she realized that the guy that looked like Willy Wonka was basically an angel of death, and that he was very kind, and her fear completely went away. Then she had all these thoughts happening simultaneously. There really is something after death. Death is so easy. The guy told her that you're being given a choice, and she said, death is a dancer. And then she said, what? Why did I say that? And she realized that the angel of death was doing a special assignment to help her. And he said, do you wish to stay or do you wish to go? Meaning, stay, remain alive, go with them. And she said she wanted to stay, meaning she wanted to be with them. So they had a little miscommunication there. The guy said, you need to know a few things before you decide what you're going to do. She was shown her mother grieving her death, and she was told that your death will destroy your mother, and in her destruction she will destroy others. Her mother's life would be over, and it would destroy her father's life as well if she died. So she was shown her husband and realized from being shown, they had a kind of a problematic relationship. She realized how much he really loved her, but she still wanted to stay dead. And the angel told her that your kids will be okay. They're not going to fall apart, but they won't ever accomplish as much as they could have if you had been around. If you were close to guide them, they will have more accomplished spiritually in life. So she was astonished. She didn't want to be tied to earth at all, but somehow she knew that after death, she'd be in a place to learn, but not if she had to stick around and help to guide her kids from the afterlife. So she wanted to be in this place of learning, with lessons and answers, but she realized she had an obligation to the people she would leave behind. She knew that she could do a better job helping her children from the physical world. So the two figures went back across the barrier. They were going to escort her into death, but she decided against that, and the angel guy told her, before you go, there are other things we want you to know. So suddenly she found herself not in a tunnel, but in another place, like a backyard. And there were a circle of people, like maybe 8 or 10 people they called themselves her council. And every soul has a council that's responsible for her. And they said, we want you to know something. And they showed her an African-American woman, and they picked up the skin on her and said, this is completely unimportant. And she said, well, I know that. You don't need to tell me that. But there was a reason. Then probably get the message across, right? So then suddenly she was on a road with 2 East Indian young men who were also part of her council, and to show her her real self, which was a beautiful, brilliant, opaque light, a sphere. She entered the sphere of light. She said it was like being bathed in this milky white stuff. When she came out, she said she knew this was herself. She perceived her good and her bad. She was embarrassed. She says, I have a lot to work on. But her counselors smiled and nodded. Yeah, you've got a lot to work on, but without judgment. And then it got really hazy, and she saw all these stars, which were really souls, and that she was not one all by itself, that we're all one and can't be destroyed. And then she was in a meadow looking at a grove of trees, knowing that this is a symbol of life. A ball of light came out and hit her in the chest and filled her with a sense of love. And then the next thing she knew, she was in her body. And she heard the counselor telling her, as she kind of left that spirit plane, stay married, you're meant to be married. So she came to, she was in ICU, and there was a nurse standing over her looking really upset. So she says she knows it was real. She says, like I joked, that was some good Demerol. She said, yes, she was on medication, but this was no medication. She says, maybe sometimes you almost have to lose your life to find it, to find your purpose. So that was the reason for this near-death experience. And it had a profound effect on her. First, she told her husband, do not resuscitate me. And 25 years later, when she was dying of cancer, he had her resuscitated, and she was furious with him. She was very upset. And she said, after she was resuscitated, she was lying in the bed alone, and a young male nurse came in and put an IV in her finger, which is a really strange place to put an IV. And she got better. And she told everybody, well, that young male nurse put an IV in my finger. They said, we don't have a young male nurse. So, okay, I'm going to end here because it's a good place to end. And I'll start video number 2 here in a second. And I hope you're enjoying this. I find this fascinating, absolutely fascinating. I don't know what to make of it. I'd like to believe it, but we're going to continue, and it gets even more interesting. So I hope you're following along, and I hope you're enjoying it, and we'll be back here in a few minutes. A slung of oil.